It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. You know it's still the month of August when Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey joins us from Washington. How are you?
I'm fine, and I'm wearing my Washington summer suit. It's one of the last days that you can do that.
All right. It is, yeah. It's before Labor Day where you are. With us here in the studio is the Paris correspondent for Politico.eu, Rim Momtaz.
Hello.
Nice to see you. It's been a studious summer for you.
It has, yes,
right.
It has.
Laure Mondeville took time off. She is senior correspondent at French daily newspaper Le Figaro. How are you?
Hello. I'm fine.
All right. When I was a cub reporter, there was an editor with a red corrector pen who had to endure my copy. Throwing caution to the wind, George Lewinsky joins us today.
Happy to be here.
In from San Francisco. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
All right. The World This Week on Facebook and on Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. He campaigned for Brexit on the promise of returning the power from Brussels to Westminster. Boris Johnson drawing first blood with the surprise move to prorogue Parliament beyond the scheduled break for party conferences, all the way to October the 14th, just days before the last EU summit that heads us straight to that October 31st deadline for leaving the European Union. Quickly going viral, the hashtag Stop the Coup, and while some protest, others cheer. The Sun newspaper headlining Big Suspender under the headline, Ballsy Boris comes out fighting. Laure Mondeville.
Yes.
Boris Johnson's move?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm being a bit cautious about Britain. I know that, the indignation and the fury is very high, and it's very difficult actually to read what's really going to happen because, you have Boris Johnson going for this bold move. And as we know, he's written a book on Churchill. He thinks he has some kind of mission and that here he represents, the legitimacy of the people. And on the other hand, you have, the parliament and his adversaries thinking that it's actually a coup and that it should be, fought. And there is this willingness of his adversaries, both from the Conservative and from the opposition, to sort of join forces to try to stop his approach, this sort of suspension of the 5 weeks.
But he knows they're splintered.
Exactly. He knows there is splinter. He's, he's just saying, if you want to oppose me, go for elections or go for a change of the law, because he's actually, it is a legal move.
All right, and he's offered a third explanation this Friday. The new UK Prime Minister saying it's all simply about ensuring a strong hand in negotiations with the European Union.
As long as they think in the EU that Parliament might try to block Brexit or might even succeed in blocking Brexit, the less likely they are to give us the deal we want. So the weird thing is that the more the parliamentarians try to block the no deal Brexit, the more likely it is that we'll end up in that situation.
Christopher Dickey, do you follow Boris Johnson's logic?
Well, the weird thing is Boris Johnson, for starters. But I understand his logic. His logic is he's got to chart out a very hard line. We're ready to go for no deal. We're ready to just walk away from the European Union, come what may, with the idea that at the end of the day, Brussels will fold and say, okay, let's negotiate some more and we can find a way around this, which may happen. I think Angela Merkel is not at all enthusiastic about a no-deal Brexit. I think Macron French President Macron is not terribly enthusiastic either, but I don't think he wants to be blackmailed by Boris Johnson. But in the meantime, I think what we have to, I wanted to respond to something that Laura said. The legitimacy of the people doesn't reside in Boris Johnson. First of all, he was never elected. The people who chose him were about 90,000 geriatric and sclerotic Tories, not 48 million voters in Britain. And in any case, the legitimacy of the people doesn't reside in individuals in a real democracy. It resides in the institutions. And Boris Johnson, just like Donald Trump, and I'm sure Jair Bolsonaro and others, basically believe that they can destroy those institutions or undermine them terribly and hang on to power. And that's exactly what we're going to see Boris Johnson try to do.
We're going to see that. Did you see this coming, Rim Mumtaz? You saw him up close covering the G7 summit in Biarritz just a day before he made that announcement.
I mean, it's not a surprise because Dominic Cummings, his special advisor, had brought this up actually weeks ahead. It's not necessarily, and this is where I kind of agree with Laure, where we need to, I think, suspend our outrage. We seem to be living in the age and the era of outrage. Boris Johnson is not a dumb person. He clearly, there's a plan, whether you agree with it or not. It's his plan to try to get Brexit, with a deal, without a deal, whatever, over the line. We also should sort of recognize that over the past 2 years, the British Parliament has not been able to vote on either the withdrawal agreement or a path forward. So in a way, I can see the logic that he has. Now, his logic of saying, I'm also showing the Europeans that I mean business by suspending Parliament, maybe that's his way of thinking, but I've been talking to French officials since he suspended Parliament or prorogued Parliament. And to them, I just got a collective shrug. They're like, this doesn't change anything for us. We're just spectators of British internal politics. The president has said 4 months, like a broken record since February, that there are 2 conditions under which the European Union would reopen negotiation. That is a new political fact, which is either new general elections or a referendum on the withdrawal agreement. That's it. We're not there yet.
So what are these bi-weekly talks we're going to see in September all about between the UK and the EU?
Sure. I mean, so now there's this news that they're going to intensify talks. But the reality is, another French official told me yesterday, they feel like they're a broken record. They've been repeating the same thing for 2 years. They have the same conversations for 2 years. They can meet twice a week. It's not going to change the basis on which they're negotiating.
All right. Pro-Remain, The Economist, asking who's going to stop Boris. For a few hours, when he made that announcement on Wednesday, attention's turned to a little old lady who's been going to Parliament since 1952, but she's never once weighed in on politics and has only read the pieces of paper written for her from Downing Street. The Queen, quick to issue a statement saying this was not going to change this time around and that she would do as told. George Lewinsky, do you wish that the Queen had delved into politics this time?
No, I think we've well past that in British politics, and as a former Canadian, we're well past that in Canadian politics as well. I think that the Queen has to follow the advice of her Prime Minister, and whether we like it or not, and whether she likes it or not, Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister.
Would you see the Governor-General of Canada intervening in such a crisis?
The Governor-General of Canada did intervene actually in 1970, way back when I was a young reporter, during the Quebec crisis, during Quebec's separatist crisis, and basically allowed prevented the Prime Minister from declaring a complete state of emergency in Canada.
Were you rooting for the Queen to do something, Christopher Hickey?
No, I didn't have any expectation that she would. There have been times when monarchs have stepped into very tense situations to the good of the country. The most conspicuous was King Juan Carlos in Spain back during the transition from Franco. But this is as dramatic as it is. It's not as dramatic as that. And I didn't expect the Queen would do anything differently than she did.
All right, Jeremy Corbyn wrote to the Queen, a move that was questioned by the nationalist First Minister of Scotland.
It is rather bizarre for those of us appalled by an abuse of democracy to be expecting the Queen to sort of step in and stop this. It's Parliament's job to stop this. We're told the House of Commons, some of us have been quite cynical about this for a long time, is the mother of parliaments, that the sovereignty of the House of Commons is all. Well, there has never been a more important moment, probably in my entire lifetime, for the House of Commons to prove that.
What's your view right now, Laure Monville, on Britain's parliamentary democracy?
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Rim said, that the Rocky Horror horror show, I would say, the horror show of British parliamentary politics and British politics in general in the last 2 years brings me to think, I'm not an expert of British politics, that something has to change in the way they deal with what is going on. And in that sense, I think that Johnson is trying to move in some other way. And when Rim says that, the French won't move the lines, etc., politics, is the art of, it's a poker game. So, of course, the French now are not going to say they're going to change their lines ahead of a potential negotiation. It's true that for Boris Johnson, it's going to be very difficult to find a way to actually, square a situation which is so tough, especially with this backstop story on the border of Ireland. And so it's very difficult for him. But at the same time, I think at some point he has to move to some kind of assertive and clear position of what they want to do. Because what we've seen is we don't want, we don't know what we do, etc. I think it's been a really terrible period for the British. I'm wishing for some kind of way out.
It's interesting. When Boris Johnson came to see Emmanuel Macron, I think about 10 days ago, I got to ask him a question, and I asked him specifically, this was after he came from seeing the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. I told him, what is your concrete new alternative to backstop? A very simple question. He dodged the question. Yeah. I followed up. When he tried to answer the question I'd asked President Macron, I said to him, yes, but on the concrete backstop. And he gave me kind of a cop-out answer. Maybe he's trying to keep his cards close, but I think it's time for things to get clearer. And it doesn't seem to be very clear at this stage in the negotiation. Maybe that's their approach. I'm with you on the fact that things can change. Maybe the positions will evolve on both sides, but...
And does it have to do with the backstop, or does it have to do with pandering to the wing of his party, which is hard Brexit or bust?
Well, there's that. Of course, obviously, and you can't blame him for that. He's an elected official in a democracy. He must reflect those positions. You also have to think about why is Brexit important? Why is the backstop important? President Macron, in one of his press conferences lately, talked about peace in Ireland and how important peace in Ireland is for the continent. And I think that maybe we are not paying enough attention to that as well. It's not just about Macron playing tough guy. It has to do with also the recent history of Europe.
Christopher Dickey, on this point, we have seen that there's no one person around which the opposition to Boris Johnson can coalesce, although we've had some strong language from the Speaker of Parliament, himself a Conservative, John Bercow. What are you expecting when Parliament does reconvene for a short while as of next Tuesday?
Well, I think there'll be a lot of furious debate, but I think that that the tune will continue to be dictated by Boris Johnson. Look, the person who keeps Boris Johnson and the Tories in power is Jeremy Corbyn. Basically, there's a huge segment of British society that is terrified of Corbyn, that doesn't want him to become Prime Minister. This is why we don't have new elections. Any other democracy would have had new elections at this point. But we haven't had them because basically there are so many people who don't want the leader of the Labour Party, seen as a very, very radical leftist, to take power. And that is what might happen if there were new elections. So whether Parliament is prorogued or not, whether there's a Brexit deal or not, we're not going to have those new elections.
Before those new elections happen, we're already seeing the tearing apart of the Conservative Party, leader of the Conservatives in Scotland resigning, strong language from the former finance minister, Philip Hammond. So the redrawing of the political landscape, could it happen sooner rather than later?
Well, it could. We've seen some signs of that in the local elections, but it's really a state of flux. I mean, from being a model of democracy for the world, Great Britain is now a joke when we talk about its democracy. It really, and even the Financial Times, not exactly a liberal or leftist paper, has come out and said that the performance of Boris Johnson and the Tories is just absolutely shameful at this point.
And Christopher Dickey making the point about Jeremy Corbyn. So you have MPs from the Conservatives who don't like the Prime Minister and MPs from the Labour Party who, for the most part, are Remainers and don't like Jeremy Corbyn. Is this just a British disease, or is this?
Well, I mean, if you look at what's going on in the United States, I mean, you have a certain rump of the Republican Party that loves Donald Trump. A large majority of the Republican Party will just go along with him because he seems that he might win. And I think a majority of Americans who loathe, 60% loathe Donald Trump. So, you know, we're going to have elections, we'll find out. But I'm not surprised. I mean, the establishment parties, whether it's the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, the Republican Party in the United States or the Democratic Party in the United States, the Liberal Party in Canada or the Tory Party in Canada, they all have disappointed a segment of the population. And I think people are all over the democratic world. They're looking for kind of these disruptors, these people who are not part of any established party, just someone who will stir things up.
I agree totally. I think that, you know, of course, the British situation, Christopher says it's a joke, but when you look at the rest of Europe and the rest of the West, I mean, I'm sorry, the situation is not great. So
we'll be talking about Italy just after the break.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Italy, but even France. I mean, at the moment, suddenly Macron is seen as this kind of, again, this wonder king, this sort of king of Europe coming in to sort of save the day and explain what should be European sovereignty. But in fact, I mean, we should remember that Macron has been dealing with an extraordinary rebellion, for insurgency in the all over France for months and months and months, with bloody fights in the streets of Paris. So I don't think anyone is really equipped to give lessons, and the Germans are having huge problems between the East and the West. We have a piece in the Financial Times today. So I think we should keep modest and try in some way, I guess, to help the Brits out of this horrible situation.
All right, we'll see just how modest Emmanuel Macron is on the heels of that G7 summit. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast, whose foreign editor is prolonging the summer by joining us today from Washington. Christopher Dickey, welcome back. Welcome back as well to Reem Momtaz, Paris correspondent for Politico, Laure Mondeville, senior correspondent for French daily newspaper Le Figaro, and San Francisco-based reporter George Lewinsky. We love visitors. Thank you for dropping it. From the nation that popularized the carousel, a stunning turn of political merry-go-round, even by Italian standards, outgoing Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte tasked with forming the next government, but the choice of the populist five-star movement, with a mandate to drop the far-right Lega party of Matteo Salvini in favor of their previous arch-rivals, the center-left Democratic Party. To think that 14 months ago, Five Star ran on a ticket of kicking out the mainstream. George Lewinsky, before the break, you were talking about being disruptive. That was if that wasn't the mandate for Five Star, what is?
Yeah, they are very disruptive. I think that, but being in power and getting the perks of power are always stronger. It'll be very interesting to see whether the Five Star members of the party, the rank and file, who are supposed to vote on what
this online internet
poll, will go with their leaders on this thing.
And it sounds this Friday as though we're hearing I don't know if it's cold feet or what, but Luigi Di Maio suddenly coming out with these demands, which the Democratic Party is calling an unacceptable ultimatum. Is this just a little bit of posturing before they all get along?
You think I'm going to come forward with any kind of anything, a diagnosis on Italy? Who knows what's going to happen next? Obviously, a populist movement like the Five Star is going to try to, come up with something new at the last minute, try to get better negotiating terms. There's a big question on what Di Maio is going to end up doing, if he gets a good position or not. It's really, really quite interesting to hear Renzi talk about the Five Star movement.
Former Prime Minister.
Of course, and kind of, the leader of the PD. He was asked point blank, what changed? And he said, well, no, they've actually changed their positions. They've become more, mainstream. My big question with all of this is this going to be a coalition for something? Or is it just a coalition against Salvini? Because it's not a basis to have a government to just do a coalition against someone. You need to stand for something. For better or worse, the Salvini Five Star coalition did last longer than the average Italian government.
14 months, it's true. Of course, I've heard both sides of the argument, seen from the other side of the Alps, people telling me, Laurent Mondeville, that well, in Italy, this is like France's Fourth Republic after World War II. People are used to, you do a deal with one side, then you do a deal with another.
It's actually, in a way, true because, and I think that's what Salvini has forgotten. Salvini was so absolutely convinced that, politics were now different and that if he had the street, if he had the popular support, and we're coming back to my dichotomy of the British politics I was talking about earlier, popular legitimacy and parliamentary, politics. And what we're seeing now is the opposite trend that, in fact, Salvini thought, I've got the street, I've been on all the beaches, I'm going to push for this sort of coup in the summer, and I will win. I will go back to the elections, and I will come back stronger. And suddenly he remembers, he's reminded rather, that you can have a parliamentary game going on while he's doing his little things, and that they suddenly came up with this extraordinary alliance. But it's bizarre in a way that he was so surprised because his alliance with the Five Stars was pretty awkward too. Right. And so he should have expected that. What is interesting is to what extent, this Five Stars is actually going to get divided, and that Conte, who is sort of emerging political figure, is going to be smart enough to handle them.
Let's talk about that, because one of the factors in all this is the emergence of what had been up to now depicted as a puppet sometimes, the technocratic Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, really coming into his own last week. It was a speech he took where he took on Salvini before the Italian Senate. Giuseppe Conte, with the outgoing deputy PM, seated to his right. He even referenced BuzzFeed News' scoop about a Lega bigwig trying to fund Russian oil money over to Salvini's far-right party.
Caro Ministro dell'Interno.
Dear Interior Minister, dear Matteo, promoting this government crisis, you have taken a serious responsibility for the country. You announced this crisis, asking for full powers to run the country, and in recent weeks, there are rabble-rousing people in the streets who support you. Your behavior is concerning me. If you had accepted to come here and address the Senate on the case of the alleged Russian funding, a case that inevitably needs to be clarified, also for the implications it has at international level.
Chris Verdicchi, were you surprised by Conte's performance?
Yes, I was surprised. And immediately you started getting headlines that said in Italy, from puppet to prime minister, and look at the transformation. It was a real game-changing moment for him, that resignation speech where he just let it all hang out and made it clear how much he resents the way Salvini has been operating, and also reflecting Luigi Di Maio and the Five Star Movement's resentment of Salvini. The problem is that Salvini has a very strong core of support, about the same as Donald Trump's in the United States, about 36%, which in a parliamentary system would mean that if there are new elections, he would very probably come back into the government and finally be able to get the post that he wants, which is the prime minister's post. In Italy, as some commentators have said, revenge is always a big part of politics. And there is this sense that the coalition gathering against Salvini is exactly what Reams suggested it is, a coalition that doesn't know where it wants to go, but knows who it doesn't want in office. And the effort is entirely about blocking Salvini at this moment.
Yeah, and Salvini undeterred after that bare-chested summer beach tour that Laure Mondeville was referencing a short while ago. He is now planning an Italian pride rally in Rome in October to push for snap elections.
All of you are asking me if by any chance I'm thinking of giving up. Never, never. Otherwise, what does our vote count for? What do elections count for? What does it mean that in the European elections, the League was chosen by the Italian people as the first party, and instead, in Europe, they send people of completely different views, and they deny Italian people the right to vote?
George Lewinsky, those Facebook messages that Salvini does, as Christopher Dickey was saying, he's got that core of supporters.
He knows how to cater to his core support. The problem is that you have to expand support. He might be able to win with 36% because I don't know enough about Italian in politics to judge about that. But I just know that he will. It's be very difficult for him to get anything close to 50%. I would imagine in Italy.
All right.
No other government has, I think, since the war. I mean,
in the how to handle populists department, the bromance is officially back on between Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron. Macron, the French president, who hosted a G7 summit where he talked up the chances of a meeting between Trump and his Iranian counterpart in the coming weeks and announced a breakthrough of sorts in the dispute over taxing tech giants. Afterwards, in an interview with French television, Macron putting modesty aside.
France has outdone itself. You can be proud of Biarritz, of the Basque country, and of yourself. Great work has been achieved.
France has outdone itself. It's shining, he said.
I mean, are you surprised? This is the country that is always cocoricoing everywhere. No, actually, to be honest, I've been noticing that French President Emmanuel Macron has been using the word modest and, humility much more than he's ever had.
Since the Yellow Vest movement.
Since the Yellow Vest movement, and also over the past 2 weeks, really, he's constantly saying, I need to try, this is his new tactic in diplomacy, we need to try.
But did he fall off the wagon with that interview?
Well, I think he was riding high on what he feels he was able to accomplish at the G7. And it's interesting because the G7 expectations were so dismal as we were going in that he was able to obviously turn it into a win, even though if you look deeply on each one of the verticals that they were supposed to talk about, well, it's more nuanced than just an outright victory, of course.
George Lewinsky?
Yeah, I think that Macron and everyone at the G7 summit was delighted that the crazy guy in Washington didn't, start throwing mud around.
How do you do it? Is this Macron's doing?
I think Macron kept things at expectations being very low. I think that Trump is more worried about what's happening at home than he was about what was going to happen at the G7 summit. I think he was embarrassed by his performance in Ottawa or Quebec the year before, and I don't think he was going to go out. It just didn't want to go. He didn't want to fight today.
Christopher Dickey, how do you explain it?
No, I think Macron handled Trump very well at this. Basically, he let Trump be Trump, and he allowed Trump to be very much the center of attention. He had a couple of things that Trump could talk about and take away as big wins. He let Trump purvey a lot of fake news. I mean, the whole business about the China phone calls that Trump came up with just before the stock market opened in the United States on Monday after making it plunge 600 points the previous Friday, all of that played to Trump's ego and played to his political needs, which Macron has always understood pretty well. On major issues that concern Europe, concern the world, like, say, climate change, there was no advancement with Trump, and really not much advancement from the G7. But let me just say, I think the G7 is a worthless organization. It doesn't do much of anything. The one thing it was supposed to do was affirm democratic values. And when you have somebody like Trump in the middle of it, who not only doesn't personally affirm those values, but also keeps insisting that Vladimir Putin be invited back to the G8, basically it just shows up the pointlessness of the organization to begin with.
The G6+1, was that what you attended, Reem Momtaz?
No, not at all. And that was the expectation. You see, that's what was very interesting. Macron was very aware going in that this was going to be the big risk, and he definitely didn't want that to happen. So what did he do? He very astutely waited for him personally as he arrived to his hotel, suggested having a one-on-one lunch that lasted for 2 hours. The two of them alone, that's not nothing. And then throughout the G7, he constantly cajoled him with references. At the end, he did a joint press conference with Trump. The French side said it was because they wanted to do kind of a handover because the US has the presidency of the G7 next year. But it wasn't about that. It was about handling Trump and giving him that sort of statute of a world, leader on the world stage. At the same time, sure, I think Chris is right in the sense that the G7, what is it good for? But what will be interesting about this G7 is that perhaps it helped that multilateral format survive Trump. Let's not forget that when the G7 was in Taormina, which was the first G7 that Trump attended, people had real questions about whether it would survive the Trump presidency. And then after his performance in Ottawa, people were going into Biarritz thinking, are we ever going to get over it? And actually, the French really delivered on that. They delivered it to the finish line, and now Trump is going to host it. We'll see what he does with it.
All right, and instead of, by the way, of trash-talking Donald Trump, Macron took on Brazil's president for, as he put it, lying about commitments to reforest the Amazon. A social media tiff about the French First Lady's looks didn't help matters, as Jair Bolsonaro sneered at Macron's offer of $20 million to help fight the current forest fires in the Amazon.
The fact that he twice called me a liar and said that the Amazon's sovereignty is all relative, only after he takes back what he said about me, as the person who represents Brazil as the elected president and the patriotic spirit of our people, I do not accept calling into question the sovereignty of the Amazon.
Laurent Montville, does Jair Bolsonaro have a point? This is a tricky one because the Amazon is a treasure of humanity. It's the planet's lungs, the world's biggest primary rainforest, but it's Brazilian sovereign territory.
It is, actually. And what I think, on this whole story of Amazon and Bolsonaro and Macron, I think it's all a big theater, and that we are actually, on the G7 and more generally in this particular time of ours, constantly on a stage. It's like the Shakespearean approach, and I think that in fact everyone is playing his part. Macron wanted to talk about the climate. He just sort of attacked Brazil for not doing enough, but Bolsonaro was not happy because he felt attacked. He insulted him in the Trumpian way, in a very awful way as well. But what is interesting is that Lula, for instance, had actually done nothing about these big fires which occurred during his time, etc. So everyone is playing his game against the populist. I find it not very interesting, actually, to look at that. I just wanted to say a word, actually, about the way Macron played his part on the G7. I think that why he got on with Trump is that he's actually came and he confirmed it during the conference on the ambassadors with a program which is very, in a way, is disruptive and is taking some elements from Trump. He's actually Trumpized his approach to foreign policy, and he told him, you were right on Iran in some ways, and so we want to reconcile. I mean, there was taking from him and reconciling different positions. And that's why it worked, I think.
All right, the issue of the climate change, one of the criticisms that's been levied against the French is that they are living in a glass house when it comes to climate change. Germany and France are going to have trouble meeting their own climate carbon-cutting goals. If you look at the map of the Amazon rainforest, what do we see in the top, up at the top there? French Guyana. And right now, the French government, at the end of July, approved exploration permits for gold mines in the Amazon forest.
And having traveled to Brazil several times, the worst thing that affects the Amazon rainforest are the gold miners, because they are unstoppable. I mean, the lust for gold is, as we know, kind of humanity's curse, and they go absolutely nuts on it. I had friends who owned a little reserve off the Amazon, and they said that lumber cutting or farming would not really hurt them nearly as much as gold mining. Second thing you have to remember about Brazil, that rainforest, those borders are very porous. You don't know whether Peruvians are coming into sovereign Brazilian territory or Colombians or Venezuelans. There's movement all the time, and Brazil has worried about its sovereignty over that part of its country for many years.
How do you reconcile, Christopher Dickey, the competing problems, which are on the one hand saving the planet from overheating, and on the other hand, national sovereignty when you're a leader of one of these countries?
Chernobyl, and I don't think anybody would say it had no impact on the rest of the planet or on Europe. In fact, it had a huge impact. And what we see with these Amazon fires is essentially a kind of a new Chernobyl, where you have a spread of a lot of carbon dioxide, you have a destruction of a lot of rainforest, and you have it at the behest of a president who who explicitly has contempt for the idea that the rainforest should be saved. He wants to see them opened up. He wants to see more industry, more logging, more farming, and all of that is hugely destructive. Now, you can say that's sovereign territory of Brazil, or you can look at it as another kind of Chernobyl, which is the way I think we should look at it. And then you say, no, I'm sorry, it's not just a Brazilian problem.
And by the way, I know I'm speaking to the Montreal native in the room here. Right. There's elections coming up in Canada, and the issue of meeting those climate goals and what to do, it's a major talking point there.
Major issue in the election. The Liberal Party of Canada, the governing party, Justin Trudeau's party, is doing what the Liberal Party has done always in its history, which is playing both sides, taking a little bit from the left, taking a little bit from the right. So on one time, Trudeau will ban plastic bags. The next day, he'll authorize the building of a pipeline across Western Canada. So he's going back and forth all the time.
All right, speaking of Canada, Christopher Dickey, we couldn't help noticing that the Daily Beast's fashion editor devoted an entire piece to the photo of the week, in particular, as quote, the particularly dramatic look Melania Trump saved for that encounter with Justin Trudeau. Boy, that picture has really become, everyone seems to be getting a lot of mileage out of it, Chris.
Yes, well, it's not only the expression on her face, it's also the expression on Trump's face in that photograph. That seems to be very revealing, but as we all know, any frozen moment in a photograph can be very misleading as well as revealing. I don't think that Melania was really so hot for Justin Trudeau, but maybe. I wasn't there.
How much reporting did Politico do on this matter?
I'm very proud to say exactly 0.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Reem Momtaz, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well George Lewinsky. I want to thank Laure Mondeville, Christopher Dickey for being with us from Washington, D.C. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Simon Harding on the theme Summer's Not Quite Yet Over. There's still, for football fans, this issue of the transfer window, which closes this weekend.
The transfer window, which closes, and the Neymar saga, of course. Good evening, Francois. Good evening, everyone. It's been one of the most talked about topics this week, of course. Is Neymar going to stay with Paris Saint-Germain? Is he going to leave to go to Barcelona? It's been going back and forth, and I think it's resumed very well by this tweet of a French television presenter, Julien Courbet, who says, urgent, Neymar's going to Barca, urgent, Neymar's going to Real Madrid, urgent, Neymar stays in Paris, and so on and so on and so on. So you get the idea of how the media and how everyone is looking from the outside onto this deal. This picture is particularly telling. It's the Qatari CEO of Paris Saint-Germain, Nasser Al-Khelaifi, who's looking very distraught, very confused about what's going on.
Because whatever happens, he's going to lose money on how much he spent to buy him from Barcelona.
Well, not so much, according to what's been reported, Francois. Neymar was bought for 220 million. They're saying that he could go for 215.
Really?
Which should be separated in 2 payments of 80 million plus Ousmane Dembele and Ivan Rakitic. The problem is that those players don't actually want to go. And this is a Marca in English. So Marca, of course, is a very Madrid paper. So for years have been on Rakitic's case, being a Barcelona player. But here they say he's been an exemplary player for Barcelona. Now the fans want him out. He might be forced into the Neymar deal. Ivan Rakitic doesn't deserve this. And of course, that goes to show that he doesn't want to leave. He said it explicitly. And the other player in the deal, who is Ousmane Dembele, the young French sensation. You can see him here with the caption, live from the airport of Barcelona, Dembele leaving to go to Paris because, of course, he's also said, I don't want to go. So this is the sticky point. It is Paris want these players don't want to go, Barcelona want Neymar, and they don't know how to get that deal across the line. There's very little time left to do it, and I think this article in 90 Minutes, which is a purely sports online website, which says the lengthy transfer saga is beyond dull, and he's not even worth all the hassle.
Not even worth all the hassle.
Well, let's not forget, Francois, when Neymar came to Paris Saint-Germain, he was the star possibly in the world, but since then he's lost value, he's been ridiculed, he's made Paris almost look foolish in certain cases, he's been very, he's had loads of off-the-field incidents, of course, so he's not exactly the player that Paris Saint-Germain bought 2 years ago.
So which is getting more coverage, Melania's dress or this transfer saga, Laure Mondeville in Le Figaro?
I wouldn't tell you.
All right.
The deadline?
The transfer deadline ends on September 1st at midnight, so just on so when we go into September 2nd, of course, and we're still waiting to see what happens, Francois. There's been a lot of talk about this week of when it's going to go through. In my opinion, if it does happen, it'll be at the very last minute. Laurent Perrin, who's a sports journalist for Le Parisien, said in this tweet, which is in French, I'll just translate it, that Paris are holding out for the situation. They're showing a resilience to get the deal they want. But of course, as I've already mentioned, the terms of that deal still need to be polished. And of course, let's not forget that Kylian Mbappe and Edinson Cavani are injured for Paris Saint-Germain, which means that if they lose an attacking player, they'll need to replace him.
All right, many thanks for that, Simon Harding. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.